matter. Some of you already know them. I'm just going to let them take over.
What is the title of this class? Forestry. Okay, all right. And most of you are in the NRES department with a focus on forestry?
Yep.
Okay, all right. And you're going to make a wonderful life for yourself, earning a ton of money doing forestry and fire stuff in California, right? That's the big plan?
Big money.
Big money.
Oh.
Big money. Okay, all right. So I just assumed that right on this tour, that you're like a senior, junior, whatever, you're stoked a little bit on the idea of trees and forestry, and you've had some classes, and then I'll go forward with that as my assumption for who you are. All right, here's who I am. Here's my short bio. My name is Matt Ritter. I'm a professor here in the biology department. There's a bunch of departments at Cal Poly. Those are in 5 colleges, and I'm in the College of Science and Math. The NRAS department is in the College of Agriculture, and I've been a biology professor for 20 years and been studying urban forestry and trees in California for 20 years. I grew up here in California. I'm a 7th generation Californian. I grew up in Mendocino County. Got a Ph.D. at UC San Diego. Before that, I got an undergrad degree at UC Santa Barbara, and then came here as a professor at age 26 a long ass time ago, and have been living the dream. It's been a great run, and I've had a lot of great students in that time, a ton of graduate students, a few people who have been postdocs that have worked for me here. I run a research lab that studies urban forestry. I've written 7 books, 5 of which have been about trees or plants in California. And so it's been great. And at Cal Poly, I've had the opportunity to do all kinds of stuff. I teach only 1 class a year now, and that's called field botany, which I teach every spring. Julian was in it, and you guys have heard of that class, yeah? Mm-hmm. Some of you intend to take it, hopefully. Jen Yost and I will get you in vans, and we'll take you all throughout California, and we'll do camping and learn about 500 native species in California, including the 95 native trees to California, and their ecology and where they occur and all of the associates with them. And that's the 1 class I teach now. And the rest of the time I run a research lab that studies trees, and mostly urban forestry though. That there's so much to understand in urban forestry in California, and I'm sure Ron has defined this for you, but urban forestry obviously is the forests of trees and associated plants and parks, gardens, and streetways that occurs in about 3.5% to 4% of California's land area. 95% of all the population in California live in less than 5% of the land area of California. So that's like from Sacramento down through to the Bay Area, along the coast of California, down through LA and San Diego. That's where 35 of the 40 million or so people live. And the rest of California, the population is actually, the population density is actually pretty small. And huge forests out there. But this urban forest that is in that 4% or 4.5% of California is incredibly important. Well, it's incredibly important, right? Because that's where everybody lives. It's the trees that people interact with day in, day out. Above their campus, above their business, above their street that they walk around and check out and live under. And unfortunately, the urban forest in California, like a lot of resources in California, is not equally distributed. Right? We've learned over the last decade and a half, that poor people don't have trees in California and rich people do. That's the unfortunate situation that has taken place in a lot of places in the world, but particularly California is gnarly because California, as you guys all know, has a Mediterranean climate, and it's really hard to grow trees here. Trees don't just grow automatically on their own in California. Do you guys know that places like the East Coast of the United States where it rains during the summer, they put trees in the ground there and they just grow without people tending them? In fact, there's farmers in Vermont and Connecticut and so on that have to defend their fields from trees coming into those fields. Right? It's such a different situation here in California, where it stops raining in March or April and doesn't start raining again until November. that's brutal on all of these trees. Look at them. They're all so dry and in trouble right now, waiting for the groundwater to come back. And in California, if we don't water them in the first 3 to 5 years of their lives, they're not going to make it. In fact, there's a statistic, which is if you take the Los Angeles basin and you say what's the average age of trees in the Los Angeles basin? This is the urban forest in that very populated area. And the answer is 7 years old. That's the average age. And why 7 years old? Well, because of infant mortality, basically. Everybody likes to plant trees, and growing trees is very hard. In fact, people plant trees, they get out there with their nonprofit or their student group or their church or whatever, and they plant a tree and they sing Kumbaya and they walk away and the tree dies. That's what happens over and over again because of the brutal climate that we have here. And so urban forestry in California is very different than other places in the world because of this Mediterranean climate. And so therefore, water in California equals money, which equals wealth, right? And if you can put water on trees and you can have a gardener dealing with the trees at your house and so on, you'll have a beautiful tree eventually. But if you don't have that and you don't have the resources and you're just trying to get to work and do your job, the last thing you want to have to deal with is watering the tree on your street. And so what that does, if you compound that over many, many years, and also if you break up cities, you see that the rich people live in areas that are nice and have always been nice, with higher water level tables and better soil and crappy areas. What you end up after many years is huge disparities in the urban forest. South Central Los Angeles is like 5 miles from Beverly Hills as the crow flies in a straight line. And the canopy cover and tree sizes there are very, very different, even though it's the same soil, it's the same geological formation, same environment really. And the only difference is the people that are there. And so we have recognized this problem in urban forestry in California, the disparities, and then people are going about trying to solve it. That's the biggest and most important thing going on in California right now. Trying to solve it with money, planning and programming, new and interesting trees, and that's where my research group comes in. New and interesting trees, and trees that work. If you could put a tree in the ground that actually thrived on neglect and would just grow into a tree in the absence of giving it any water or anything that mattered, then you could potentially actually grow a forest with very low resources. And there are trees out there that are like that. And we can model their climate where they were native to. We can say that, oh, this tree, it comes from and grows into trees and evolved in a climate that is much drier and hotter than California. Those are the trees we should be focused on and trying to figure out, can we grow urban forests in places where it's always been hard? Because keep in mind, it's only 4% of the land area of California, but that's where everybody lives. So what's the number one priority for urban forestry? The health and well-being of people. Right? Not butterflies, not insects, not wildlife corridors, none of that stuff. It matters compared to the health and well-being of humans. And if you don't think that's true, that's fine. You and I just disagree. If you think butterflies are more important than the health and well-being of humans, then you're like a crazy environmentalist. And that's fine. That's fine. But a lot of people have that attitude, right? But I don't. And I think if we are going to live in cities and in California, the climate is changing and it's getting hotter and drier, and Baja California is marching towards Oregon, and its tool to get there is fire. It's just like burning everything, right? The forests in California are going away. There's massive type conversion in the ecology and forests of California. We know that. Southern Sierra Nevada is a great example, where over the last decade and a half, 2 decades, it's just burnt and burnt and burnt, and trees have not come back in many areas. What came back was shrubs and grasslands and chaparral. That's a massive amount of type conversion. Same thing is happening in Humboldt County and Mendocino County. We've had these massive mega fires over the last decade, and the problem with that is that you don't get forests back in many places. So that's happening in the background of California, and can we do anything about it? I don't know. I'm not actually totally sure. I want to be able to tell you as an old person that you're a young person. It's going to be great. You guys are going to solve it. So proud of you. But maybe that's not the case, right? Maybe California is going to burn in the background, but it doesn't have to be that way in our built environments. In our cities actually could be oases for good places for people to live while the effects of climate change happen in the background, and we get used to it. And so that is the idea behind urban forestry. That's our vision. A bunch of colleagues of mine and I run two things that you should know about. One is called the Urban Forest Ecosystems Institute here at Cal Poly, UFEI, and that's just a website in which we deliver tools to people who work in the urban forest and to the public who's interested in urban forestry. UFEI is got a bunch of tools there. Those are the links that you would scroll through. One of those is very famous and widely used. It's the most widely used tree website in the world now. It's called Selectree, SELECTREE. And if you Google tree selection or anything like that, you're going to come up with that as your number one hit. And what that is it's an online interactive guide for people to say, I would like a tree that's evergreen, doesn't grow taller than 50 feet, has red flowers, and is native to this area. And it searches a database of 2,200, 2,300 species and gives you back the results of what tree satisfies the characteristics that you input. Those 2,200 species also have 50 characters associated with them and a ton of really high quality photos. Selectree. It's a really valuable thing for you. And you can actually create now an account on Selectree. So you have your own account on Selectree, and you can make lists. You could say make a new list, and these are the trees I saw with Dr. Ritter on his tour. And you just quickly go through them, and you say Acacia pendula, and you can just start to type in pendula, and that tree would come up immediately. You could see photos of it. You'd say plus, and then boom, you would add it. And so the list feature is really rad. It has a static URL, so you can send trees to people. What are the trees you have learned in the urban forestry class? You can make that list. Have any of you had dendrology? Right. Well, you could make a list of all the trees that you would have seen in dendrology. They're very accurately curated, very high quality photos of those species and good information. We also started a nonprofit that works throughout California. We got a bunch of money from Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act to work with nonprofits all over California as a central group that helps them figure out what to plant in their area. It's a hard question for many people. If you're a little nonprofit tree organization in San Diego, California, let's say, and you want to improve San Diego, and you've gotten money from some donor or a church group or an organization, and you're like, okay, we're going to go out as a group and we're going to plant trees in San Diego. What should we plant, and where do we get it? It's a very hard question for people. What to plant, and where to get it. Right, tree selection, going back to what I said earlier, can determine the difference between planting a tree that thrives on neglect or planting a thing that's just going to take so much care and water and effort that you're fighting an uphill battle the entire life of the span of that tree. That's tree selection. That's the difference between quality tree selection and just randomly going to Home Depot, buying whatever tree is on sale there and putting it in the ground, which tends to fail very often. Julian.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You said there's about 2,000 species in the Selectree database.
2,300.
2,300, okay.
Yep.
How do you go about adding new species to that? Do you ever remove species? How does that work?
We never remove species. And how many species are there in the world, you guys? A tree is a plant that you can walk under. A shrub you have to walk around. Okay, those are the two woody things that are out in the world. Trees you can walk under, shrubs you have to walk around. It's a very simple definition, and it works 95% of the time. The U.S. Forest Service has a definition, which is a thing that grows over a certain height with a single trunk that's a certain diameter and raised canopy and all that. Whatever. How many species are woody plants in the world that grow to a height where you could walk under them and they have a single trunk and they have a raised canopy? Okay, let's go even more global then. How many plant species are there in the world? Okay, so let's do orders of magnitude here. Okay, you guys got this. Remember, some of you, I recognize you because you took botany from me, and you should be able to remember this. Are there more than 30? More than 300? 3,000? 30,000? Yeah, you want to go higher than 30,000? 300,000. This is just plants in general. How about 3 million? Are we hitting your growth edge right now?
Yeah.
Your level of comfort? 30 million? You have no clue. I know what you guys are thinking right now. I can just look it up, right? But really, you should have a working knowledge of some stuff. You want to seem as smart, you should have that. Just think in orders of magnitude. And the answer with plants in general is 300,000, give or take. And there's 60,000 of those that grow as trees. Most of those are in the tropics, but not all of them. We have a bunch of species, so that's 60,000 species, Julian.
Yeah.
And I said 2,300 in select tree. We have a long, long way to go, right? And most of those trees won't grow in California, have no chance of being here or anything like that. But we do add new species all the time. There are 800 species in the genus Eucalyptus, all but 2 of which occur entirely in Australia. This is a red gum, by the way, the national champion red gum. How many of those 800 should we add for urban forestry in California? Well, lots of them is the answer, and we're constantly adding more and more and more as we learn more and more species. You know, last night at midnight, I returned from a project site that we have on Oahu. And working with a bunch of Pacific Islanders, many of those islands. And I'm talking about like Guam and Micronesia and all these places. It's brutal. They're U.S. protectorates, but they're very poor and they don't have good systems there. And so this nonprofit I'm talking about works with them as well. But when I was in Oahu, I found pictures of 2 new species potentially for California. So I took a ton of photos, and then I'll work with Sean and I will add 2 new species to select tree that are potential trees for California. The first, like anything, the first 90% of anything you do is easy. The last 10% is brutally hard. Right? It just gets harder and harder, the law of diminishing returns. And so we're trying to add new species all the time. And we never delete anything because even though there's trees that are wildly inappropriate for California, that we used to grow in the past, they're no good anymore. It's really important that people know about those. So in California, we have all these urban forests, and here at Cal Poly, we have a pretty awesome urban forest. If you look at what Cal Poly is here, there's trees all around us. None of these trees were here 100 years ago. That's not actually true. The very first photo of this campus is from 1913. It was a photo taken from about half a mile down that way, looking up at this hillside. And it's a crazy photo. You can go to the library and see it. They were taking a picture of the dairy, and the dairy was about 200 yards up there, up where faculty offices east is. And remember, Cal Poly started in 1901. So this is now like 12 years into Cal Poly. They had created a dairy. They had a graduating class of 12, 13 students, and what you would see all around us is nothing except grasslands. That's what this portion of San Luis Obispo was, just grasslands everywhere here. The shrublands would come down into different parts, and there was Brizolara Creek running through this area, which would have riparian trees in it. Things like sycamores and coast live oaks and cottonwoods and so on were in Brizolara Creek. But this tree was in that photo. Eucalyptus comodulensis, planted early on in California, first in California in 1856, along with most eucalyptus. In the 1850s and 60s is when they came to California, and a river of shit ran down here, all the way right through here. There was like a ravine that went that way, and all of that stuff came out of the dairy and went out and eventually connected with Brizolara Creek. And so this tree did really well. It was actually relatively large in that 1913 photo. And what are we? We're here now 110 years later, and it's still there. It's still alive. There's two individuals there. You're seeing one right behind this this national champion. And I'd say it's a national champion because there's no known individual that's larger than this based on its point score, which is when we measure a tree for national champion status, it is the diameter of it in inches added to the height of it in feet added to the canopy spread in feet. You add up those three numbers, you get a point score, and there's no red gum eucalyptus that's even close. In fact, a tree was close to this. It was in Fresno. It fell down. This became the national champion in like 2005.
How do you add up the point score again?
So circumference of the tree in inches, plus the height of the tree in feet, plus the canopy spread, and that canopy spread is actually divided by 4. And so if you add all those up, you get a point score. The California Big Tree Registry, which I'm the coordinator of, there's 50 state coordinators for the Big Tree Registry, and that's the National Big Tree Registry, is got the national champions. Probably we have about 80 national champions in California, and obviously a bunch of state champions were the biggest individual, and people go out and search for the largest sugar pine that they can find. We know where the largest giant sequoia is. We know where the largest and tallest coast redwood is. All of these types of things are all in that California registry, and that registry link is also on the UFEI website, so you can find that there as well. And that's a fun and awesome job. You get to go see and measure really big trees. And on this campus we have 2 champions. On this campus and on the registry, it's native and non-native trees that we have on the registry. And this is obviously non-native. It's native to Australia, but it grows and reproduces on its own in California. So and we have another champion. All right, so all of that. Like I gave you the example earlier, is we're looking for trees that have evolved in very drought-prone areas that would do well in California, right? Because how could a tree evolve in South Central Australia without being drought-tolerant? There's no chance of it, right? It just wouldn't be in the gene pool anymore if it was susceptible to seasonal drought. And so you go to South Central Australia, you go to cities like Adelaide and Perth, and you figure out what trees are they growing there, and you're like, okay, these are good possibilities for California, this small land area in California where everybody lives, because it'll turn into something awesome without us trying very hard. Because if we have to try hard, we'll fail. We won't water it, we won't do it. And the frost building was pushed back because in order to save that tree.
When measuring that tree, do you take into account the other?
No.
behind
It's
it?
just that one right there. Yep. And it's about 100 feet tall. It's got a canopy spread of about 85 feet, something like that.
Around back there.
It's massive.
Yeah, and we're real proud of it. It's like part of Cal Poly's heritage that we have this rat old tree. I just told you the story of it being here in our first photo of campus and all that. So a new big science building is irrelevant compared to that tree,
Oh, this building.
right? And so
It was going to come out.
yeah, the corner of the building was going to be somewhere out in here.
Yeah.
And President Armstrong was like, nope, that's not going to
Is that
happen.
even legal to cut it down?
It's not. It's not. but people can get away with a lot of things. It doesn't matter. And everything is a decision. It's a cultural decision about what we value here at Cal Poly, right? It's a $130 million building, right? Entirely privately funded. The first time anything like that has happened at Cal Poly. We don't want to mess with that. Right, and this was an awesome solution to get both things. To have our cultural heritage intact, because we are a tree campus. We're a Tree Campus USA, but we're just a tree campus in general. Trees are interwoven into the history of Cal Poly, and so is forestry, and so is agriculture, right? And so we don't want to mess with that either. All right, so we are planting new trees all the time here on campus. Let's just go look at one right here. here's a good example of a tree that most people would never know, never hear of. This is a tree from South Central Australia, in the state of South Australia, and it's in the genus Angophora. They grow it all over the place in Australia, and I had the opportunity to bring it to California. Planted one here, planted one up by the dorms, and one down by the railroad track. And they're all thriving. And they've gotten no water. Right? And like, look at it. It's totally fine. And in fact, I grew it in a little 1 gallon pot. And it did fine there. It got broken. And we were like, oh, we'll plant it anyway. That's why it has that little codominant leader here at the bottom. This, in urban forestry in general, it's really important to care for trees early on in their life. And there's people whose job's entirely to do that. Ron did that for many years. We'd go around and do structural pruning, they call it, on new young trees. So Ron would come by with a little pruner or a little saw of some kind and just remove this from here up, and then it would grow as a nice single trunk. That's just the result of damage. You wouldn't want that to go later in life in the plant, because what would eventually happen is if both those got real heavy, they would go up and they would go like this and break apart. Arborists talk all the time about the structure of trees, right, and the pruning of them, and if you're not careful of the structure and the pruning of trees, you can cause damage later on. And a little bit of care here will ensure that this thing has a better life in the future.
You want me to pull these
Yeah.
bur oak and...
Yeah, you know, it's pretty awesome. We got a bur oak and a Colereteria. But here's what Ron is referring to right here. This is Quercus macrocarpa. There's 14 trees on the other side of this building right here that are planted by scrub jays, and there's one coming up there. And this is Colereteria. This is Colereteria bipinnata right here, and that's a seedling off of that tree right over there. No, leave them alone. We'll see. They'll suffer there.
See who outcompetes?
Yeah. And I've
The conversion
put a
for
lot
it.
of little things coming up in these areas here to try to see what does fine and what doesn't.
It's the California conversion.
Yeah, exactly. For our Arbor Day celebration in 2019, we planted that tree right there. That's Corymbia maculata, or Eucalyptus maculata, the spotted gum. Another real performer. Takes no water at all and does just fine. And we'll eventually produce a massive tree with a beautiful big canopy. And then eventually, given 20 or 30 years, this thing will shade this building and be a beautiful, big, awesome tree with very little work. That's the kind of trees we're looking for.
Urban forests too.
Yeah, oh, yeah,
You
for
go
sure.
into like maybe the wild side to see like just
Both. And the most recent trip that I'm talking about was a trip with a guy, an arborist in South Australia named Dean Nicole, who's a good friend of mine. He's the world's eucalyptus expert. He studies arboriculture and our trees in general in Australia. He has all the collection permits we need, everything we need in order to be able to do the work to be able to bring new species into cultivation. But many of these species are already in cultivation in Australia and are growing in these hot, dry cities in Australia.
And then a little STEM question after.
Yeah.
When you bring the seeds back, like do you ever have problems like trying to bring them back to California when you do?
No, what I do is I will take the fruit and the seeds and I will stuff them into a condom and swallow that. And then I just make it through customs, no problem. And then I get them later. It's all good. So we all do what we have to do for science. Yeah. No. It's not even that technical. In fact, you could go online and order seeds of these species. It's better to know the provenance of where they came from. And I tend to like to collect things from high elevation or drier areas within their range. You have a better chance that way. Yeah. But you can order, like I said, you can just order things online, and we do a lot of that. Julian is part of a project in which we raise a ton of trees here on Cal Poly's campus and sell that out to nurseries, particularly Devil Mountain and the West Coast Arborist nurseries. We raise little plants in little teeny pots like this. We sell them to them, which gives us money to raise more, get more plots and more and pay people and all of that. And Devil Mountain gets those, and they get rare and interesting things that's hard for them to get, and then they raise them into big old things that people plant in the urban forest. And we do that with oaks, We do it with pines, we do it with eucalyptus, and we do it with a bunch of broadleaf trees that people want because they're rare. This is Chionanthus retusus, Chinese fringe tree from Western China, in dry areas of Western China. I planted that tree in 2014. And it'll get probably twice as big, but not much bigger than that. It's a small tree, and it comes in a beautiful white flower. And then after it's done, it makes these fruit. And this is now being more widely grown throughout California. There's a couple seeds in here, and Julian and his tree crew people will come out here and they'll collect every fruit off of that thing, and we'll raise a ton more of these, and pass them out in California.
I do have a question.
Yes.
You're doing some like walk later today. Is it the same thing?
We're gonna go on a totally different route. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I'll get bored if not.
Yeah.
The bur oak that Ron mentioned is right there, and that's the species Quercus macrocarpa. It's got huge and awesome acorns. They're about this big. They might be up on the tree right now. They tend to get pulled off by wildlife and eaten and so on. You can see the remnants of some of the acorns that didn't survive. But here, there's the acorn cups on some of them. These fell off earlier. It's called a bur oak because it has these little burrs that are on the tips of the acorn cup scales. Macrocarpa in Latin means large fruited. It's one of the largest acorn fruited oaks, and it's from the Midwest and the eastern United States. It's a heritage tree on campus right here. It's one of the largest bur oaks on the West Coast, and they get to be really big trees if you give them a ton of summer water. It's suffered for right there in that place for 80 years, maybe something like that, but it's doing fine. And we planted 14 new ones of them on the other side of Baker. Almost all trees make pans. Even the biggest sequoias, they make pans, and they don't go very deep. Well, why do they go very deep? Because there's not much there. All the action is in the first 5 to 6 feet of the ground, and a lot of the action is within the first foot, right? Where that's all the water and all the fungi and all the material is right there, and definitely in that situation. And so when you cut off the water that long, those trees really suffer, and that happened in California in a number of places.
What's your opinion about liquid amber while I have you here on camera?
They're the best tree I've ever seen. In the right
Are
setting.
you a fan of sweet gum?
Probably I'm jaded because of years of dealing with them on the city sidewalks and all that stuff. But in the middle of a park that gets watered enough, it's a big, beautiful tree.
A lot of limb failure,
Yeah, there's that.
bad crotching,
They get long tips and break off.
shallow roots,
Yep,
huge roots.
I agree with all of that.
Money in the form of water.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan.
Are they pretty in the fall? Yeah.
Beautiful. Yep.
Would I want one at my house? No.
No, thanks.
And when you walk around campus and all these new high school newbies come in and they're like, this place looks great, you know, we have a great website, we got lawns. And so a lot of where we save the lawns were areas like this, which are high traffic areas, or areas that were outside classrooms basically, where people sit. That is another good example of a lawn where people sit there all the time and want to
Liquid amber styraciflua. I am not a huge fan. Very brittle tree. Bad root systems. Poor crotching characteristics.
I bet you got a bee in the class.
But they do have beautiful fall color. Oh, and don't forget they drop these little seed pods that are a tripping hazard for a lot of people. Because these little balls with the prickles. Would much rather have a Magnolia grandiflora like this one. It's a beautiful tree, low maintenance, strong, nice scaffold branching, beautiful flowers, And do not drop big, huge seed pods or as much as liquid amber. And it's evergreen.
I'd say we meet at like 11:30. So we can go and each get like 10 balls.
This is the one-of-a-kind tree in the genus Erythrina. This is Erythrina humiana from Brazil, the hot poker tree, and they have a Brazilian name for it as well. You can see it's in full bloom here. We moved this tree here in 2008 as a mature individual from where that practice field is, the sports field on the other side of the campus there. It was there, and that practice field got expanded to thousands of trees in a day out of a little pouch that you jam a tree in the ground and move on. And that becomes a pine forest of a reforestation event. That's very different than what happens in urban forestry, where on average in California, planting a single tree, $500 to $2,000 for a single tree in urban forestry in California. And why is that? Well, because you got to pay people's time. The tree is the least expensive thing. It's the cutting out the sidewalk. It's the people that have to go there and water it and all that kind of stuff. It's very expensive. It is very time consuming for people that manage trees, and so they get to be expensive. The Inflation Reduction Act that Joe Biden and his administration did gave $1.2 billion to urban forestry in the United States, and we got a bunch of that in California. And they calculated out how much money they need in order to plant all those trees, and it was between $500 and $2,000 a tree. That's what they calculated out. So it's expensive. And intense things like this happened because this was the only one of its kind in California. So we were like, oh, we're gonna save this thing. We're gonna do our best, and it was costly and all that. We've moved trees on this campus that cost a lot of money. The bur oaks that are on the other side of Baker there, we bought those for $10,000 a piece, and we bought 14 of them. That seems expensive, doesn't it? Yeah. And those were grown from an acorn, and they were in 80-inch boxes, and they were shipped up here on several big flatbed trucks, and it took a crane to plant them and all. It's the best collection of those now in California. But the Baker building, right? It costs about $150 million. And I just said we'd spend $140,000 on some trees. Big deal. Not even a drop in the bucket when you're talking about a $150 million building. Nothing. But we had no problem justifying that. Well, we did have a little problem justifying it, but we did it anyway because that's a very small expense compared to how expensive that building is. But that's intense practices, very different than the forestry that you guys know about, which is like replanting a bunch of things very quickly.
You're spending millions and millions developing this thing.
Right.
A couple $1,000s on some trees. That's the least expensive thing. It was the least expensive requirement of the development, and they bitch the most about it.
Yeah, true.
All right, here's Jacaranda mimosifolia.
Good tree.
Yeah, Jacaranda is from Brazil as well.
There's so many. The British planted them in the 1800s.
It is a famous flowering tree in California and other places in the world. It makes some purple flowers. It's been planted in mass in many cities in the world. A very common tree in southern Africa, East Africa. I'm trying to think of, there's a city in South Africa called Jacaranda City. It starts with a P. Anyway.
Victoria?
Yes. Wherever it rains in the summer, this thing grows well. And actually in Hawaii, it's a weed on the Big Island, and there's some populations of this. In the April and May, they lose their leaves completely. It comes from a subtropical area, so it's drought deciduous. And the day length changes just right, and they lose their leaves, and then in June, May sometimes, and as late as July sometimes, they come into full flower. Sometimes with no leaves on them at all, and they're spectacular. And neighborhoods in San Diego and Los Angeles are defined by this tree. Did somebody have a question about it? Yeah.
Just when you come in and you find all these invasive species like around in the urban forests in California, are there like regulations that you have to follow to make sure that they don't get outside?
his question is a great one, and I'm gonna address it in a number of ways. But you said invasive species, okay? So we have to define that term, right? There's a bunch of. Here's a good example of this. Is jacaranda invasive here, or is the sweet gum invasive here? Imagine, do this thought experiment with me. If we all immediately disappeared, and the irrigation stopped on the Cal Poly campus, so now there's no humans, and the wildlife is taken back over, and it's great, right? This tree will just grow until it dies.
Okay.
And won't make any new individuals won't come up, and jacaranda will no longer be represented in San Luis Obispo at all. The species would not survive here.
Yeah.
In order for this species to survive, we have to plant it, care for it, and then it'll grow into a mature individual, but it is not capable of creating a population on its own. Plants that are capable of creating population on their own, we call those naturalized plants. The word is naturalized. And then some naturalized plants are not only capable of creating populations on their own, those populations spread out, tenaciously hold on to their position in a plant community, and actually take over other plants within a plant community. Those we call invasive. Dave Richardson in South Africa is a professor there who studied non-native, invasive, and naturalized plants his entire career, and he has really good definitions for what these words actually are ecologically. And so, do we have invasive trees in California? We have like 2 species, and it really depends on where they are. A good example would be Acacia dialbata, the silver acacia, in and around Santa Cruz. If you go over Highway 17, just as you get down into Santa Cruz in that area, Acacia dialbata has spread out in a bunch of areas there. There's like 4 acacias that can spread okay. There's Eucalyptus globulus in northern western California, in Monterey County, some parts of Marin County, and where it's wet all the time there. And it's in riparian areas because that species requires constant water in order to do well and reproduce. It spreads out there. That blue gum is a good example of a species that doesn't survive at all in Southern California. Good luck finding a blue gum in San Diego. They just aren't there because it's too dry there. They crap out, and they're around, but they don't do very well. And they're more like the jacaranda there. Yeah. And so, because wood growth requires water. You can't have wood without water in the environment. It's just not real. It's a violation of laws of physics to get that kind of growth without having the growing tips and the cambial layers access to water all the time. Trees require water. And the wettest places in the world have the biggest trees. The wettest places in California have the biggest trees. If you look at forest diversity and height and all those things in California, and you overlay a map of precipitation, they're identical almost, right? And so in California, where it's very dry, most species that are weedy in other places where it's wet can't do well here, like the jacaranda is a good example. And so, am I worried about introducing new species to California, to our urban forests, because they're going to spread out and take over wildlands and so on? Not at all. Not at all. And there are species that people consider invasive, they're just like not thinking clearly when they say invasive. And a good example would be the tree of heaven. It's a good example. You guys know the tree I'm talking about? Ailanthus altissima. It is capable of reproducing on its own in California, but not very much. And when it's planted, it shoots out roots, and those roots make new shoots that make a little population. But I tell you what, you could find an invasion of Ailanthus altissima, give you and I a chainsaw, and we could ruin that entire population in a day or 2. Get rid of all of it, right? And if we had Jeremy and Ron there, we'd do it in a couple hours, right? And that's because it's like a couple hundred yards and a couple thousand stems. That is very different than African veld grass, which has taken over the dunes out in San Luis Obispo and a number of places in California, and has ruined whole areas and is a gnarly invasive species. Right? Everybody worries about the blue gum in Los Osos and Montaña de Oro and so on, but those things are still in rows that were planted 100 years ago. And meanwhile, running like a wildfire underneath that whole thing is the African veld grass that is just destroying the coastal dune scrub. which is an actual invasive species. But the eucalyptus are big, so we get all fired up about it, right? But really, the large trees that are non-native weedy in California is a myth.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not going to say they don't exist, because they do, and I can find them, and I have found them, and I wrote a portion of the Jepson manual about all of this, and they're real, but it's not the kind of thing we need to worry about too much. So that's a great question.
So
Yes.
rather than invasive, what would you call it? Exotic?
Yeah. Okay. So I just say non-native.
Okay.
I say non-native. People, can distinguish that very well, native and non-native. From the late 1700s till now, people have brought new plants into California constantly. Native trees in California, we have 95 of them. 95 of the 6,000 species that are native to California, you could argue, grow into a single nice big trunk thing. We have a bunch of shrubs. You know, manzanitas are not trees. Ceanothus are not trees. There's a bunch of shrubs because that's what California is. It's mostly shrubs and grasslands in the coastal areas, coniferous forests in the high elevations, and oak woodlands surrounding them. In our oak woodlands, we have 20 species of oaks. Half of those are shrubs, and so we just don't have that many trees in California. Why don't we have very many tree species? Because it's too dry. It's too dry. You know, there's single 1 acre areas in Costa Rica or Brazil that have more species of trees growing on them than California, because all the water that's there, right? And so California's a harsh place for trees, and we just don't have very many. But we have 95, and some of the most impressive trees in the world. Yeah, and those of you who have taken dendrology, you know most of them. We have 18 species of pine trees here, native here. We live in an area that has really regular seasons, right? The Mediterranean climate, although it's very different from other places, still has regular seasons in which you get cool, wet winters, hot, dry summers, a lot of growth in the spring and all of that. And that leads to trees in California, native trees in California. If you go and cut down one of the coast live oaks or something, you're going to see rings in it. That's differential speeds of growth of the vascular cambium. Tropical trees don't do that at all. 2 weeks ago, Lily, I was in Singapore, and I saw the remnant forest in Singapore, and the biggest, most massive things, mostly that are called dipterocarps, which are not in Costa Rica, but very similar. Massive jungle, very hard to study, because you walk up to a tree, or another tree, and the canopy is like 200 feet up there. And it's hot, and everything wants to eat you, and there's monkeys and all that kind of stuff. And so there's like so little known about some of those forests. Even in Costa Rica, which has been well studied, there's very little known about some of those forests. And how old are those trees? We have no idea, actually. And you say, like, people can estimate it based on the growth of other things around it, but that's just like a terrible estimate, basically. When you're in a situation in which a tree does not make any growth rings, it's really hard to tell. The black keys on a piano, right, that's ebony wood. If you look closely at ebony wood, there are no growth rings in it. Ebony grows in a place that has no seasons. Singapore is at 1 degree latitude. It has the same exact weather year round, right? And trees there don't grow periodically. They just grow constantly. And the cambium is just growing constantly, so there's no way to know. And we just don't know very much about the forests, which is awesome.
And I just remember walking through there and comparing it to being through like a massive forest in, say, like Humboldt County or something,
Yeah.
where that feels ancient.
Yep.
Costa Rica just felt like
It's not ancient.
permanently stuck in the present. Like,
Yeah,
'cause
no,
these trees
it's
just
not
felt like
ancient.
they were constantly regenerating. And I remember them pointing out a tree that they estimated to be like 300 or 400 years old, and they were like, and that's like old for this area because things are just growing and falling and regenerating.
300
all the
years
time.
old is very old for tropical forests.
Yeah.
The amount of disturbance that takes place there in most tropical forests is very high compared to ancient forests in Humboldt County,
Yeah.
right? That are dominated by 2,000-year-old individuals. And people who have worked in tropical forests can tell you this as well, that they've seen a tree over 40 years become a massive thing, right? 40 or 50-year-old tree become, especially, I mean, Jeremy, you've seen this in ficus. can be crazy fast growing and massive in tropical forests. They can start up in other canopies, and they can do all kinds of crazy things in a relatively short period of time. Constantly stuck in the present is a good way of thinking about tropical forests. This is a tropical tree right here from Sumatra, which I planted in 2018, and I was just messing around. I got some seeds from the Huntington Botanical Garden. They had one in there in their conservatory, and we grew it here, and we're like, okay, we'll plant it. And we planted it along with that tree, those couple of trees, all at this, and that one over there, all at the same time. And it's in the genus Rauwolfia sumatrensis. It has no right grown as well as it has here. They're all poisonous. They're members of the Apocynaceae, the same plant family as oleander, and
very medicinal also.
Yeah, like anything that's very poisonous is very medicinal, right? And it's about dosage, and this thing now has fruits on it. It flowered and came into fruit and so on. So full success. Totally surprised. This tree right next to it, Acacia koa. That's a koa tree, which is native to Hawaii, endemic to Hawaii, and only occurs in Hawaii. That makes the most expensive wood in the world, which is called koa. There's very little of it left. That's their native, their native tree there. One of their most important native trees. I collected that from upper elevation, very cold area, in Ko'oke'e State Park in Hawaii. And it does okay here, and we have one on campus that does pretty well, and it's got, you know, like many acacias from Australia and the Pacific Islands, it makes phyllodes. So this is like a leaf that has evolved a very different growth form as it matures, in which the rachis flattens out, and the leaflets disappear. So as Australia floated northward and got drier and drier, this leaf form evolved in the acacias that were where the origin of diversity is Australia. All acacias make bipinnately compound leaves, but some, as they get older, they convert to these. And so all the acacias we grow in California have these phyllodes. Of the 900 or so species in Australia, I think 800 about have these phyllodes. And you can see the transition happening constantly on Acacia koa. Well, that thing has suffered and not done very well. There's another one over there with dead top on it and all that. Clearly not a good tree for California. We planted about 1,000 of these throughout California in the urban forest, hoping for the best. And you learn some stuff. You win some, you lose some, whatever. Right there past Julian is another tree. That's a native tree to California that we moved here from the Frost Building. And it was planted by Bob Hoover in the 1930s, and he was one of the first botany professors in California. He loved this species, Aesculus californica, and this one he got and planted a number of them on campus because they're pink flowered, white flowered species in general, but this one is pink flowering. And for many years, Suncrest Nursery, Native Sons Nursery, and San Marcos growers have come to campus to collect these seeds because it comes true to pink. And if you collect these and plant these, they're pink flowered. And people like pink more than white flowered on this species. And so when that building was being destroyed and all the species there, we made the effort to move it here. Dug it up with a backhoe, dug a big hole in the ground here. It got damaged in the process. It looked terrible for a year or two. We thought for sure that it was going to die. And maybe it's slowly dying. I can't tell. But it's flowered and fruited a number of times since putting it in, and it's put on some new growth. It's just in such bad shape. You know, like that is not good. When you see that on a tree, it's not good. But come look close, you guys. Come look close. I'll show you what hope looks like here in a tree. Because remember that plants in general, and trees specifically, they're not regenerative at all. We're super regenerative. Animals are regenerative, meaning this: if you get damaged, cells rush to that area and move into it, start to grow and repair, regenerate, right? In fact, things have happened to you that you have no evidence of anymore. You got to cut. You can't even tell it was ever there. You scar sometimes, but sometimes you don't, right? But everything that happens to a plant stays there in the body of that plant, and it just grows over stuff because no cells are moving. And so it just grows around damage. That's what plants do. And trees, the entire history of that tree is there in the trunk and in the wood and so on. And so you can see it's got a major damage right here. But look what's happening right underneath here. Is this cord-like looking thing right there? That is bark that is growing and rolling in this direction. So it's growing like this, and it's growing like this, and eventually those will come together and repair or cover up this entire thing. So look, this is actively growing, that's actively growing. This is dead wood. Look, a little lizard. Right, so this is actually not living tissue anymore. This is old tissue that once conducted water up into the tree and so on. But there's some hope here, right? Because this is rolling inward, and they'll eventually, given the time, these two will connect, and then this will grow over this entire thing. And fast forward 80 years, you wouldn't even be able to tell any of this is here. It would all be inside there. The history of it would be there in the tree once you cut it open as a knot and so on. But that's awesome. The fact that I see that growing and so on, and you could take a knife and scrape that, and you would see there's green tissue there and all that. So maybe it's going to survive. Again, a heritage tree for Cal Poly. Named and planted by a person, coveted by people in California, and he, in his records, in his notebook, said where he got this tree. He got it right off River Road outside of Salinas. You know, it's pretty awesome. And we have a number of trees on this campus, some of the conifers up there that Bob Roden planted, where we know exactly where he got those and when he planted them and all of that. It's awesome history. Yeah.
I know for other plants, I forget what that room is. It's in the next to the Fisher building.
It's called an herbarium.
Yeah, the herbarium.
Yeah, it's called the Hoover Herbarium, named after Bob Hoover.
And they keep all the Marsota perennial herbarium in there. Oh, I guess they keep the tree samples too.
Everything, yeah.
Is that where you're getting all the info, where they got the trees and where they kept them, or where are you getting all that from? How do you know where all these trees are from?
I have read Bob Hoover's materials and his notebooks and so on. So that's where I know what he did. A colleague of mine, Dave Keel, who hired me, was hired by Bob Hoover along with a bunch of other people. And Dave Keel just wrote the flora of San Luis Obispo County, which is called the Hoover Flora, dedicated to that guy. And Dave really wrote the history of that guy's life. Yeah. And Bob died in 1970, 4 years before I was born. And I never met the guy or anything like that. And Bob Roden died even before that. And just having read the histories of Cal Poly, yeah. You know, and a lot of what I've told you here is just personal experience too. Like, I know when I planted that tree. Well, yeah. You know, in my career, I've planted a lot of trees here at Cal Poly, hundreds and hundreds of trees. Some of them have been successes, and some have been failures, and it's been great.
Matt, can I ask you a quick question before we go?
Yeah.
I see the golden rain trees over there, that row.
Yeah.
They do amazingly well here in California.
I planted those.
Did you?
Yeah. Rich Thompson and I planted them together, actually.
That's
in
cool.
this class, you guys.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Are they originally from China, or where do they come from?
Yeah, so that's, there's actually, depending on which taxonomy you believe in, there's 3 or 4 species in the genus Corateria. There's Corateria paniculata, bipinnata, and elegans, and that's bipinnata. And bipinnata occurs in Taiwan and eastern China, and that species does really well here. We had paniculata here as well, but Corateria bipinnata, which you're seeing right there, is a Chinese Taiwan species.
They look great.
They look great, yeah. Oh, let's go over there then. Because we planted a different Chinese tree here. The thing that surprises me most about it being at your house is it hasn't got smoked by the low temperatures.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Corateria.
It has,
Yeah.
but just lightly frosted back a little bit, and then sends out the side shoot.
Yeah. Paniculata, which is grown on the East Coast and so on, is very, very cold hardy. But this one's not so much in its cold hardiness, and does really well in coastal California. Cannot believe I'm old enough to say that I planted trees that were this big. It's a real honor. It's a real honor to be able to know. And you have the same experience, you know, and
All over town.
all over town, all over town.
Too.
Yeah, and Jeremy, you too. You know, and we're supposed to be planting, each individual one of us, 80 trees a year to offset the carbon that a typical American puts into the atmosphere. 80 trees a year, planted where no tree exists, and they have to survive. How are you guys doing on your trees per year? You're doing terribly, is the answer, right? And so you should do better. There's all kinds of planting opportunities here in San Luis Obispo. You know, in San Luis Obispo, we have a 10,000 trees campaign where we're trying to plant 10,000 more trees in San Luis Obispo by 2035. We at Cal Poly have agreed to do 1,000 of those. The Rotary has agreed to do 1,000, and the city of SLO is going to do the other 8,000, and we're about 2,500 species into it. The person who's the head of that whole thing is Jen Yost. She's a professor in the biology department. You guys should email Jen and say you want to be involved in tree planting events that are happening. We're doing one out in Cheetah Ranch in January where we're going to plant a ton of native trees out on the other side of campus to, you know, and these are like small oaks and other kinds of things that we're going to put in the ground out there to try to do some reforestation out there. Beth, the woman who runs the sheep unit out there, wants trees for shade for the animals there, and so it's a great way for us to do that at Cal Poly. San Luis Obispo's Arbor Day celebration's coming up, and we're going to plant a bunch of new trees in Sinsheimer Park area. Yeah, but in California we do it in November because that's right before the rainy season. The idea that you should be planting trees in California when they have water cause people to want to change the date of that. And so in SLO we do November Arbor Day. Well, you could come back here and you could be like, I planted that tree. It's beautiful. I beautified this campus with that, right? So why not do that at least once in your career? At least once. And I'm giving you an opportunity, a gift here, right? Which is to say that you could do something that's important. I'm talking about improving the world around you. And you don't get that very often. You should seek out those opportunities. You guys are young and you're strong and you're smart and you're stoked. So what are you doing to help other people? Right? This dude goes to Africa and he plants thousands and thousands of trees with crews of people all the time to try to improve the quality of people's lives. It's like a hero, right? And the things that he's done will actually last long after Jeremy is dead and gone. And same is true of Ron. The city of San Luis Obispo is a Tree City, USA, and it's beautiful and it's got canopy and people are living better lives because of the fact that he got hired to come and he did a bunch of stuff that were above and beyond what he should have been doing, and he planted a bunch of trees. And he roped me in on that too.
He volunteered. He actually pushed for plantings.
Yeah, well, I was a commissioner in the city of SLO for 8 years. I kind of forgot and worked with Ron tightly during that time. And that's the closest that I ever wanted to be to politics. Sucked. Totally sucked. It was like, because trees are so controversial and you need a permit to remove a tree in San Luis Obispo. And if Ron says, like, I have no reason why I could remove it, it's not going to fall on you. He sends that off to a committee. I ran that committee, and arborists came to that committee. That's where I met Jeremy a number of times, and they would say, we think this tree should be removed. The neighborhood would come out and say, we think this tree should be saved, and there was like grown men yelling at each other. I had a gavel. It sucked. And then sometimes the news showed up and all this kind of stuff because it's very controversial. Trees in the urban forest are controversial. People love and hate it, and you're dealing with people's money. That though led for me to be able to have opportunities to improve the urban forest and actually plant a bunch of trees, and it's felt good. It's great to be able to walk up here and be like, Rich Thompson and I did this, and it was a bunch of students with us, and those students come back and they're like, I planted these. Look at this, you guys. Look what I did. This is awesome. This used to be a hot, nasty area. The Chinese, that right there, that's called a Chinese parasol tree. Oh, weird and awesome thing.
weird.
Chinese parasol tree. You know, and look at it. You know, those of you who have taken botany, you oftentimes don't see very clearly what a carpel is. But this is the entire fruit right there, and it's got 5 carpels. Carpels are these specialized, modified, evolutionarily modified leaves that have seeds on their margins. You squeeze that together and make it juicy. You got an orange. Right, you do that, and you put things around. You got an apple and all that. This is just like very basic fruit, and botanically very interesting. That's why I wanted to plant it, because I knew that it had these crazy fruits, and now we get to use it in our botany classes on, but it's performing well. At the time, Chinese parasol tree was really rare. And I thought it would be great to have this on campus and all that. Then I went to Barcelona, and it's their most common street tree. They just figured it out long before we did. This thing thrives on the hot, dry Mediterranean climate in Barcelona, and it's everywhere there. But we have a couple on our campus now. So great. Chinese parasol tree. Okay, you guys. So what we're looking at here is the floss silk tree. Floss silk, F-L-O-S-S, silk tree. You guys saw one with Ron down by the Mission. The genus is Saba. It's a popular tree in Los Angeles and San Diego and different places, and does really well. It's a member of the cotton family. It's related to cotton, in fact, and that's where it gets the name floss silk. It'll get a fruit on it. It's like a football. That fruit opens up, splits open, and this cottony material called kapok comes out of it. Kapok is actually a material that's used. It was used to stuff life jackets during World War II, that kind of thing.
And mattresses too.
And mattresses. It's used as stuffing. Still is used as stuffing.
Yeah.
So you notice that a pretty awesome feature about this tree is the prickles all over it. Massive number of prickles on the bark right there, and on the limbs and all that. The bark is also green. The bark is edible on this species, which is really rare for trees, that the bark would be edible.
Edible or good?
Not good, but edible. Sweet, though. As bark goes, pretty sweet. And the reason why is, well, I mean, obviously, any part of a plant that's green is doing photosynthesis. The result of photosynthesis is sugar. So sugar in the bark here. If you start to ask questions about why those prickles are there, the answer gets pretty clear. It comes from a subtropical area in which it has a dry season and it loses all its leaves, but it continues to photosynthesize with the bark without leaves on it. And that bark, that photosynthesis, it makes sugar for the roots, but it also has sugar in the bark. And sugar in the bark makes the bark edible and delicious. And how do you kill a tree? You kill a tree by girdling a tree. And so any animal that was thirsty and hungry would walk up to this tree and grind off portions of the bark in order to get the sustenance it needed. And so everything that was in the gene pool that did not have protection of that bark is long gone. So what do we have left? These weird mutants that have these outgrowths of the epidermis that protect that bark.
Is the technical word prickles?
Yeah, because a spine is a modified leaf, a thorn is a modified branch, very evolutionarily and very different things, and a prickle is an epidermal outgrowth. So growth of the of just cells around the edge. You notice they're totally random on there as well. Spines and thorns are in distinct forms and they're at nodes. This is not at nodes at all. So prickles is what we would call it. So talking about the urban forest in California, now what people talk about when they talk about urban forestry is canopy cover. Canopy cover is the additive effect of all of the shade and all the green areas over the concrete and other ground in a given place. And last year California legislature passed a law that we need to increase canopy cover in California by 10% by 2035. And 10% by 2035, Assembly Bill 2231. Although I think I've been getting that number wrong. You could look it up though. It's 10% canopy cover increase in California by 2035. That law has caused all kinds of problems, and because it's unachievable for one reason. One thing, we don't know entirely what our canopy cover is in California right now. It's like one of those things that sounded great on paper. Yeah, more trees, more canopy cover. It's exactly like the things I was telling you guys about. We need more canopy cover. We need more shade, particularly for poor and disenfranchised people in California. And to have a law that says we need to increase it, that's totally fine. But that law is so vague, hard to understand what they actually meant, that we don't know what the plan is. And so CAL FIRE came to me and our research team, and Jen Yost is heading this project in which we are writing. They said, here's a huge grant for you to write what needs to be delivered to the California State Legislature next June, the plan to achieve 10% canopy cover in California.
Wow.
And so we're responsible for bringing everybody together from California Urban Forestry. And right now we know that we have about 40 million trees in the urban forest in California. That's 1 tree per person. And minimally, if you got every one of them to survive, that's 4 million new additional trees that need to be planted in places where canopy cover doesn't exist, just for a 10% increase. 4 million new trees. So, and the 40 million number of trees is just in urban areas as well. And if you calculate out what it would cost you to plant 4 million trees in California, based on the numbers I gave you earlier, you're into the billions of dollars. Billions of dollars. Right, and so nobody has any clue what we're up for. This Urban Forest Ecosystem Institute is a collaboration of faculty from all 5 colleges, including economists and Andrew Fricker, who does mapping, and he's in liberal studies, College of Liberal Studies. Anyway, this plan is gnarly. It's very difficult, and it's a difficult problem to solve. California had no canopy cover in its urban areas in 1950. Urban forestry didn't really exist around and became popular in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s as California expanded. And our canopy cover went up and up and up and up until about 1995 or 2000. And then California got crowded, and now it's decreasing. The crowding is the number one threat to urban forest trees in California is development. Why do trees die in urban areas? Why do we lose canopy cover? Is because of development. We expand buildings. We put signs in the ground. So they came in with a tractor, dug all this out, killed the tree that was right here, that was shading this corner. And that process, which I described even right here on this corner, is happening all over California all the time. And housing laws in California make it so that you can build more and more on a lot. So much so that you don't have room for trees anymore on a lot. And so the fact that we live in the unceded territory of concrete, which is what California's urban areas are, means that trees have more and more difficulty all the time here. And so what do we get is a reducing canopy cover and reducing urban forests. And so we're working out the plan how to reverse that right now, and it's going to be expensive and hard, and when we turn our plan in, it'll probably be laughed at. But it'll be the truth. It'll be the thing that needs to happen. And this happens all the time, you guys, by the way. Every couple of years where everybody gets together and they have a meeting called the COP meetings, right? The climate change meetings, and they come up with a plan. How are we going to keep the climate under 2 degrees? How are we going to keep the climate under 1.5 degrees, whatever? They have a great plan that's like, here you go, this is what all you have to do, and everybody laughs at it. It doesn't work because everybody's like, well, if we were to fight climate change, we would have to not make very much money. We'd have to reduce our business. We'd have to slow our growth. We can't do that. It's a fascinating place to be working. And you guys, there's so much money. It's crazy. I'm right. You know I'm right. If you are a young person who is stoked on urban forestry and you're like, I'm gonna go work for Davey, and you are capable of like opening a spreadsheet, they'd be like, oh, you're immediately gonna go like immediately way up in this company. And like, oh, you can think and talk to people? All right, now you're an executive. You're like a 30-year-old executive at Davey. That's what would happen. And everybody's like, oh, you graduated from Cal Poly? We have a table waiting for you right here. Urban forestry has a bunch of people who have made their careers in it, and there's not enough young people coming up in those careers. Right. You guys should consider it, because it's a very interesting place to work too, in the sense that it involves people and complications and politics, and much more so than working out in all those burning forests in California.
And it can be rewarding.
It's super rewarding. But don't you want to have some kind of meaning in your life? Don't you want that? Do you even know what that means? Here's what meaning means in your life, as far as I know, is that you have some story that you can tell yourself that says, this is what I did. This is what I do. This is who I am. This is how I impact the world around me. Right? Some kind of meaning. And usually having a meaning in your life correlates with happiness. A connection to nature, important relationships with other humans, and meaning. Those three things, if you have them, you're so far like on your way to not having a life of shit and depression. Right? And you can get those from your career, you can get them from other people and all that, but your career should have a little bit of meaning in it. A lot of people don't have meaning in their career, right? They don't have a story that they tell themselves where like Ron is like, yeah, no, I planted all the trees. People are living a better life because of me, because of what I did. Because I got up every day and I did something that mattered. And if somebody could make an argument that like none of it matters, that's fine, but it's a story you tell yourself. I went to Africa and I improved the quality of people's lives. I feel good about myself. I have some integrity and I have some feelings of self-worth because of that. So you should grind towards that. Because guess what? If you get a career and you like deep down you think that career is shit, that you're doing something that you don't think is good every day, it's gonna suck for you, however much money there is. And so that, when Ron says you could have some meaning in urban forestry, you actually can, because you right now it's so complicated that you can improve the quality of people's lives with the work you do every day. And I don't know if you have that anymore in forestry in California. Maybe, but maybe not. I don't know. Look at that. Look what happened here, you guys. Look at that. Some gardener came by, taking care of the lawn around here with the weed whipper, and just whipped off the entire cambium all the way around. Fully girdled. This tree which I planted.
Is this the one in remembrance of the astronaut?
Yeah.
Oh god.
Yeah. Good job, guys. Wait. I mean, it's so obvious what killed this tree, right? And I want to know who's responsible. It's going to find the gardener that did this, and we're going to make that person come out here and replant a tree, and they're going to make the mistake whole again. And that's how everybody's going to walk away from this event feeling good about what happened.
Should we leave it like that for him?
Most definitely. Actually, you guys get right down and take your photo with us.
Oh my god.
Go right around the back, right there.
Shame. You're gonna shame them.
Yeah, there it is right there. Okay, 1, 2, 3 sad faces. Yes, all right, sad faces, nice. When you have a weed whip in your hand, you have to be careful. You have to watch out what you're doing, and you have to do a really good job.
What am I doing?
Yeah, I'm the chair of the campus landscape committee, and people will fear me. Yeah, I think the way to get people to fear you, which is not a great management technique at all, right? No, you work harder than them. You work harder than them. I work hard. I work very hard, and I want to do a great job. right? You should have the same attitude, I think. You go through life where you're like, I'm going to work as hard as I can and do a great job, and it's an honor to serve you. That's what I'm trying to do. And that attitude right there gets you get fear and respect. So we were like, whoa, that dude is going to get into my business if I'm not careful. Hopefully working towards more and more and better culture at Cal Poly, where everybody supports each other and works hard to do the best job that they possibly can. A couple of big, huge species of individuals of the eucalyptus species in Southwest Australia. Right there, that's Eucalyptus cornuta. Let's go look underneath that one.
Cornuta?
Cornuta.
What's the common name for it?
Bushy yate.
What?
Yeah.
That's a bushy yate?
Yep.
They get that big?
They get real big, yeah.
Oh my gosh. They're all along the highways.
Yeah, no, that's a different bushy yate.
Okay.
So the word yate is used in a ton of Australian trees. The one along the highways is Conferminata.
Okay.
It's a much smaller thing than this.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's good.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, you know, these two trees, they're just, again, trees that get really big in the absence of any water. And do we want that? I think in some places you want it. Like every tree is really rad if it's planted in the right place, right? And these now have shaded this building for 80 years now, and have probably saved on all kinds of costs for that building and made the people in it more comfortable and you know, are great. And the decision of what tree to plant, what tree to remove, when to remove a tree, how to remove it, how to do everything, those are all cool decisions that people in urban forestry get to make. We planted these little acacias underneath them. We can go look at those.
It's like just another environmental thing that's going to come kill us. Yeah.
Oh yeah. This is Acacia covilia here, and that's Acacia bormanii right here. So two different species of acacias that we planted, both of which are shrubby, very drought tolerant, awesome things that will grow into little trees eventually, and are beautiful yellow flowering things, and really are doing very well here in the understory of these massive eucalyptus trees with compacted, terrible soil, stuff dropping on them all the time. They're doing great. One of these got removed recently right there, and it got removed because of this ramp. Ron is standing on the massive root ball that was in the ground of that tree. It was like an $8,000 tree removal. You know, because taking down a tree like that, getting rid of it is not easy. That's big business doing that, and requires a lift truck and a crane and all kinds of things in order to be able to do it safely. And getting down to the bottom and grinding out the stump, which they haven't done yet, and redoing all that takes tractors and big machinery, and can be expensive. This tree dropped too much material on the handicap ramp, and eventually somebody complained enough that the only course of action was to remove the tree. If we are really about human health and well-being, some trees are negative for that. And we have to decide what we're about. I don't think we really have that decision, and everybody's about slightly different things. And some people love birds, and some people love trees, and some people love native stuff, and other people love non-native stuff, and everybody's got their own little thing that they want to defend, and all of that. Decisions get made. But again, in urban forestry, what's so awesome about it is you get to take in all of those types of things and try to make decisions about what's best based on all those input factors. And it was a painful process to make the decision that this thing had to be removed, because look at the canopy cover that we lost. You know, what's like so gnarly and depressing is the canopy cover that's there. If you add up all of the trees that I've planted on campus in my 22-year career, all those, when they've grown to now, equal one removal right here. Maybe not, right? So the removal of big old trees has to be considered very carefully if we care about canopy cover and shade and carbon sequestration and all of that, right? The amount of carbon that was in that tree that then now got chipped is now quickly rotting by fungi and returning back into CO2 in the atmosphere, that process just repeats itself again and again, right? So if we're really trying to do what we need to do is get as much carbon out of the atmosphere right now. We need like 50 good years of carbon sequestration so we can have some kind of technological catch-up so life isn't hell on Earth in the future. We need to defend big tree removal as quickly as possible. And how many of you guys are interested in fire? Raise your hand if you're like fire. Okay. Here's an idea for you. Okay, let me just give you a fact, and that's that. Do you guys know or heard of the Mendocino Complex fire? It was at the time, which was in 2020, it was the largest fire in recorded history in California. Burned up in Mendocino and Trinity and Humboldt counties right there. That fire put more carbon in the atmosphere than 9 years of all vehicular activity in the United States, including trucking and everything. One fire in California. Burnt up all those trees, turned all of the cellulose in those trees back into CO2 in the atmosphere. And it did it in about a month and a half in Northern California. One fire. Like, what is the point of driving your Prius or whatever if that's happening? You're going to save, right, 9 years of all vehicular activity. What is the point? And so what I think should happen with fire is no more fires in California. None. No more prescribed burns. Fuel reduction, fuel removal, I'm fine with that. Get out there in the forest and get there with your chainsaw and cut things and stack them, but don't let them burn. We need 50 years of no fires and no CO2 going into the atmosphere. No more burning. Because if we care about climate change, we have to stop those kinds of events from happening. And fuel will build up and build up, and hopefully we can deal with that fuel and not let it light on fire and do our best. Have dispersed firefighting all over California. No firefighter further than a couple miles from any place where it could happen, and putting all the fires out immediately, and we get 50 to 100 years of no fires, so that we can keep the fuel, all that fuel that's in California, which we call forests, from going back in the atmosphere. Because the forest that burnt in the Mendocino Complex fire, they didn't return. Right, all that CO2 that was in all those trees, and the bodies of all those trees went into the atmosphere, and that CO2 did not come back out of the atmosphere during photosynthesis to make new trees, because it was conversion. It was conversion from big-bodied, carbon-rich things to grasses and shrublands. And so how can we stop that from happening? So anybody talks to you about prescribed fire, you'd be like, oh, that person, what do they care about? They don't care about climate change, obviously. They're talking about putting CO2 back in the atmosphere, right? What are we doing? Why are you prescribing fire? Why are you putting CO2 in the atmosphere? Yeah.
My ultimate goal, professional, or whatever. Isn't that what we did? And that's why we have this problem.
Yes. Yes. He said, isn't that what we did? And is that why we have this problem? Yeah, we did it for a century. We stopped fires from happening for a century. Not all of them. And then what had happened is we have this massive accumulation of fuel and very poor forest management, all those things. I'm not advocating for poor forest management. I'm actually advocating for fuel reduction and removal, but don't do it with fire. Because, and what is fire as a tool is a cheap tool used to remove a bunch of fuel. What's expensive tool for removing a bunch of fuel is getting humans out there with chainsaws to carefully cut things up and don't let fire happen. That's very expensive. But can we afford it? Well, it depends. Yeah.
So I have a question in terms of last week we learned about fire fuel management without fire in terms of wood chipping and stuff like that.
Yep.
But something that they did burn was like invasive species, so they weren't spreading a bunch of invasives. Are you pro burning not trees or like no fire period?
No fire. Well, you want to turn invasive species into CO2 in the atmosphere? Make money and have meaning in your life if you work in urban forestry. And it's so devoid of smart young people. No offense, Jeremy and Ron. is very devoid of smart young people. And like, wouldn't you want to get into a world where the just the bar is so low, and you're immediately like, everybody's like, oh yeah, please, we have a place for you here, make decisions for us, let's go. And you work hard and try hard. So that is a thing that can happen in urban forestry forest. It is a thriving area of research and all of that. The other point I would like you to take away is potentially to come and join us, myself, Jen Yost, other people who care deeply about urban forestry, and come to the Arbor Day event. Hope to see you out there, in which you can show up and we'll plant a bunch of trees together.